I'm Erin O'Riordan. Welcome to episode 3 of Cut on Storytime with Erin O'Riordan. Cut is our crime story by me and Tid Ellington. If you haven't seen episode 2 yet, please click on the link. Make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single episode. If you'd like to read along with your own paperback copy, you can find Cut on Amazon.com. You can find it on CreateSpace. You can find it in our Etsy shop, Writer's Brain Has Wings, or you can download a digital copy right now from Smashwords. Episode 3 takes us to the beginning of Chapter 4. Chapter 4, September 1999. Edward sighed as Barbara Jean pushed her plate away. She hadn't eaten half her fish. He looked down at his own plate, clean of everything but a few scraps. "I thought you liked this restaurant," he said. Barbara Jean stared out over the railing at a potted plant hanging between them and the window. It looked dry and dusty. He imagined the staff rarely made the effort to climb out there and water it, yet the plant clung defiantly to life. "I thought you liked the food here," Edward said. "You hardly touched your meal." "It's our anniversary, Barbara. Surely you can go off your diet for a few hours on our anniversary." "I'm sure the food is lovely," she said. "We ate lunch so late today, and I'm not very hungry yet. If it makes you feel any better, I'll take the rest of the fish home." Edward nodded and gave his wife a smile. He knew the fish would go to waste unless he ate it himself. The server came to the table. Barbara Jean's eyes widened when she saw the small layer cake with white icing. Edward's smile disappeared. Barbara Jean's face spoke volumes. Not surprise, but horror. Edward's loving gesture had been taken as an insult. He'd had the nerve to suggest she eat cake. "What?" the server asked Edward. "Is it not the right one? Was I supposed to bring cheesecake or something?" Barbara Jean excused herself. Darting downstairs to the ladies' room, the server set the cake down. "I'll come back with the checks," she said. "Bring me a cup of coffee, too, please," Edward said. Barbara Jean's visits to the ladies' room were never quick. He had resigned himself to that a long time ago. "Is your wife all right?" the server asked. Edward had spent many hours thinking and praying about the question. He had known for years Barbara Jean suffered from an eating disorder. She'd had all the signs of it even before they got married 28 years before. She had good days and bad days. He knew intellectually she couldn't stop herself even if she wanted to. He knew she didn't even want to. Still, he continually hoped she would recover. She seemed to recover sometimes. For a few years in a row, when she even put on weight, she'd had to buy all new clothes, which she now called her fat clothes, and hid in the bottom of a dresser drawer. Edward felt sure the congregation, and even casual observers, suspected the nature of the problem. Still, he and Barbara Jean had been working at New Life Ministries for 7 years, and everyone was too polite, too scared perhaps, to say anything other than "I'm praying for you" to her. He gave his server the standard reply. "She'll be fine," he said. "She needs little time to herself." "Oh," the server said. She turned and walked away. Edward finished his coffee. Barbara Jean rejoined him at the table, and they carried her boxed fish and the uneaten cake out to the car. Edward looked up at the beautiful late summer night sky. The clouds, threatening rain earlier in the day, had dissipated. The moon shone full and bright. Its light shimmered in the river. "Barbara Jean, would you like to go for a walk down by the river?" Edward asked. Barbara Jean smiled. "We did that on our first date, wasn't it? Neither one of us had any money back then. Walking was about all we could do. But we always had a good time, didn't we?" A sparkle in her eyes encouraged him. "Did you like going on those walks back when we lived in Tennessee? You were so shy. It took weeks before I could get you to hold my hand." He held his hand out and she took it. They stopped at the car to put the dinner leftovers in the back seat. Then they crossed the parking lot and took the stairs down the boardwalk. Down by the water, Barbara Jean pulled her hand away. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders. "It's a bit chilly down here," she said. "I don't think I'm dressed for a moonlight stroll tonight." Edward wrapped his arms around her. He could feel her small body shaking. "I'll keep you warm." Barbara Jean shook her head. "Not tonight," she said. "Maybe tomorrow night I'll put on my jogging suit and then we can go for a walk." She wriggled free of his grasp and started back up the stairs. Edward sighed and followed her. At home, Barbara Jean went upstairs to change while Edward went to his study. As he sat at his desk, he picked up a stack of papers, his notes on the readings from last Sunday's service. He glanced at the top page, reading the words from the Song of Solomon. "My beloved speaks and says to me, 'Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away, for our winter is now past. The rain is over and gone.'" The Song of Solomon, Edward had always thought, was some of the most beautiful love poetry ever written. That's why he'd left the notes out, as a matter of fact. Earlier, he'd copied those verses into the anniversary card his secretary Ginger had picked out for him to give to Barbara Jean. "Edward," Barbara Jean said, standing at the doorway. She had changed out of her dress and into a set of white cotton pajamas. She had short socks and running shoes on. "I'm going downstairs." Downstairs meant her workout room, which took up the entire basement except the storeroom. It had no natural light, only a large TV, a mat, a treadmill, and a stationary bike. Barbara Jean spent at least an hour working out every morning. Then, after breakfast, and often after lunch and dinner as well, she could be found there again, riding the bike until she felt like she'd burned off all the calories from the meal. He told her time and again this made no sense. She needed some calories for energy, and she'd starve herself this way. Talking to her about it never did any good. She rarely went down there at this time of night, but tonight's dinner was especially calorie-rich. "It's late," Edward stated. "Why don't you go to bed?" "This is more important," she answered. Edward filed the papers on his desk and went to the kitchen. As he poured himself a glass of milk, he heard the mechanical whine of the stationary bike. It hurt him that she was willing to ride around an imaginary racecourse alone in the basement, but wouldn't go for a walk with her husband in the real world. The real world, he said to himself, that's what she's always been afraid of. Edward looked out the window at the clear, starry night. Suddenly, he realized he'd left his umbrella at the restaurant. "I'll get it tomorrow," he thought. But then again, it might be kind of nice to take that walk by himself, even if Barbara Jean wouldn't participate. If he left now, he might even be able to catch the employees before they finished cleaning up for the night, and still get his umbrella. He went downstairs. Barbara Jean did not stop pedaling. "I think I'll go for a drive," he told her. "I forgot my umbrella at the restaurant. I'd hate to lose it. You gave it to me for our 20th anniversary, after all." "Fine," she said sunnily. He felt sure she was more than happy to be left alone. Edward pulled out of the quiet subdivision and headed into town. The restaurant lay in the heart of downtown, a heart split in two by the river. By this time on Sunday night, all the bars and most restaurants had closed for the evening. In front of the Civic Theater, Edward saw a few teenagers on skateboards. Other than that, the city looked deserted. When he reached the restaurant, the lights were still on. He went to the door and found it was locked. A man with gold teeth unlocked the door for him and handed him the umbrella. Edward took it and went for a short walk alone on the boardwalk. He had just gotten back to his car when he saw them getting out of a car. The driver smiled. Under the streetlight, Edward recognized him as the man with gold teeth who had given him his umbrella. After a moment, the man went back inside the restaurant. The shorter woman with the long blonde hair was the waitress who'd served him this evening. The hostess who'd seated him, the tall girl with brown skin and long, straight black hair, walked with her. They swayed drunkenly as they walked. Edward watched them talking. He didn't expect the kiss. The two young women kissed for a few minutes, even using their tongues. Before they separated, the dark-haired girl touched the blonde girl's breast. Edward had never seen two women kissing before. He couldn't believe how it turned him on. He felt a certain thrill of the forbidden. Part of his mind, still watching the dark-haired young woman as she sat behind the wheel of the car, wanted to keep imagining the women together, their soft, warm bodies caressing. The other part of his brain feared these thoughts. He knew they were wrong. He knew it was dangerous to do anything so foolish, especially since the dark-haired woman stared at him, looking into his eyes. No, he would simply have to go home and make love to Barbara Jean. If she wasn't in the mood, he didn't know what he would do. The dark-haired girl started her car, and Edward snapped back to reality. The young woman, seemingly drunk, shouldn't drive. He got out of his car and tapped on her driver's side window. The young woman rolled the window down. "Hi," she said. She smiled. "Hi, what's your name, young lady?" "Brigid," she said. "Brigid Bell?" "Brigid, my name's Edward Prescott. Do you remember my wife and me eating at your restaurant tonight?" "Of course I remembered," Brigid said. "I'm not that drunk." "See, that's what I want to talk to you about. It's obvious you've had some drinks, and I don't think you should be driving. You could get into an accident and get hurt." She nodded. Her eyelids fluttered and drooped closed. "You see that?" he continued. "You can barely stay awake. Why don't you let me give you a ride home? You could lie down in the back of my car." He couldn't believe he said the words out loud. Of course he shouldn't be giving a young stranger a ride home, especially one so clearly intoxicated. Someone might see the two of them together. She might make up all kinds of lies about him. Her parents might be furious when he pulled up with her in his back seat. Edward knew he had good intentions, but he couldn't help feeling he wouldn't have offered her a ride if he hadn't been so intrigued by her. To his surprise, she said, "Okay." In her drunken, drowsy state, she was obviously highly suggestible. A woman her age should know better than to accept a ride from a stranger. Everything about her told him this was wrong, but he detached himself from the situation, as if he only watched, and the man standing next to the teenager's car, waiting for her, was somebody else. Brigid got out of the car and stuffed her keys inside her sack-like black purse. She followed Edward to his white Lincoln and climbed into the back seat. She couldn't stretch out, her legs were too long, but she got herself into a semi-comfortable bent-legged position. "Where do you live?" he asked as she sat in the driver's seat. "I don't want to go home," she said. "My mom's going to be pissed when she sees I'm drunk. She's a total hypocrite, but still, she grounded me from everything but school and practice the last time I came home from work after a few beers. I have a credit card. Drop me off at the downtown Westin." The hotel wasn't far at all from the restaurant, so it seemed like a reasonable request. He sat in his car and watched her go inside. Through the lobby's glass doors, he watched her check in and walk around the corner. As Edward went to leave the parking lot, he saw Brigid again. She stood by the side door, clearly waiting for something. He pulled the car up to the side of the hotel and rolled the window down. Brigid swung the door open. "What's wrong?" he asked through the window. "Did you forget something?" She smiled. She looked sober now and serious. Her eyes sparkled with a dark promise. "Nothing's wrong," she said loudly, gesturing for him to come closer. "I thought you'd like to come up and see my room." Uh-oh. Dun dun dun. Chapter 5. September 1999. "I've never done anything like this before," Edward said as Brigid shut the door behind him. "Really? I do this sort of thing all the time." She walked over to the armchair and dumped the contents of her purse onto it. She had the usual things one would expect to find in a young woman's purse. Credit cards, a checkbook, a wallet, a coin purse, lipstick, lip gloss, 2 round containers of eyeshadow, light and dark blue, a spray bottle of drugstore perfume, a brush, keys, a pen and pencil. The other contents of the purse disturbed Edward. Brigid carried around a small pile of balled-up dollar bills, several lighters, a box of condoms, and a roll of what appeared to be black duct tape. She also carried a spoon, 2 hypodermic needles, and a bag of whitish powder. Edward had been the pastor of a large congregation for 21 years now, and wasn't surprised that people used drugs. He'd counseled many of them over the years. He didn't expect it from Brigid, though. He would have been surprised to see her with a joint, much less a hardcore drug. Heroin, he guessed. Brigid didn't look like a typical heroin user. She had an athletic build, not the skinny frame of the recovering addicts Edward had worked with. Her arms weren't covered in track marks and sores. She probably used a hidden part of her body. She appeared on the surface to be a neat, professional-looking young woman. No, he certainly wouldn't have expected it from her. Brigid grabbed the bag and the needles and stuffed them back inside her purse. She shot a quick look at Edward. His eyes met hers. "Brigid," he said, "I don't mind that you're a drug user. I'm not a cop, and I'm not going to turn you in. I think we should be honest with each other, though. Are you a prostitute?" She smiled, showing some of her teeth. Her teeth weren't perfectly straight, but they were nice. "Now, Edward," she said, "what would make you say that? Because a girl likes to party, you automatically think she gets paid for sex?" "No," he said, "but I'm not totally naive either. I've counseled a lot of people who use drugs, and many of them sell themselves to supply their habits." She shrugged. "I'm not some hopeless street junkie," she said. "I work. I go to school, and I play basketball. I only use on the weekends. Let me make this perfectly clear. I have not, do not, and will not accept money in exchange for sex." "So, what are you doing here with me?" "What are you doing here with me? You're the one who's married. I'm here because I want to be here. When I have sex, I do it because I like the guy or the girl. I saw you looking at me in the parking lot. You were getting all excited watching me and Amber. And I have to admit, it got me all excited, too." She tore open the box of condoms. "So, do you want to do something or what?" He sat down on the edge of the bed. "Wait," he said. "Isn't all of this happening a little fast? Don't you want to talk a little bit first?" She shrugged. "We could, but isn't your wife waiting for you at home?" After selecting a condom from the box, she sat across from him on the bed. Now she pulled her sweater over her head. Underneath she wore a white camisole, so tight Edward saw the embroidered flowers on her bra. She sat with her legs uncrossed, and he noticed her panties had the same flowers on them. "So, don't you want to do me and get it over with?" He didn't say anything, but took off his jacket and started unbuttoning his shirt. Brigid stood and took off her skirt, folding her sweater and skirt neatly and placing them on the arm of the chair. She took off her high-heeled black shoes and began peeling off her underwear. She looked even more beautiful than Edward could have imagined in his fantasies. Not a single mark or sore appeared on her smooth brown skin. These thoughts occurred to Edward in passing. He preferred to concentrate on her perfect breasts and her beautifully rounded buttocks. Barbara Jean may have had curves like that 28 years ago, but she'd long since lost them. Edward had assumed he would never see such a beautiful nude woman's body again. Brigid stood in front of him. She took his hand and swept it down her side, letting him feel the smoothness of her skin. He could smell her as he stood so he could kiss her lips. She smelled clean and womanly with a hint of perfume. Her full, moist lips gave him kisses more intense than any he'd ever had from Barbara Jean. On the boldest day of her life, Barbara Jean couldn't have mustered Brigid's fearlessness. He wondered what made her this way. "So," Brigid said, stirring him from his reverie, "do you like to be on the top or the bottom?" Edward laughed. "What's funny? After 28 years of marriage, I never imagined I'd hear a woman say those words." She reached down and unbuttoned the top button of his pants. "Your wife lets you decide, huh?" "No," he said. "Barbara Jean and I have never—" "I get it. She's one of those wives who never gets on top. It's her loss, really. I mean, unless it's like a religious thing." "Is it a sin for the woman to be on top, Edward?" She unzipped his pants, but left it for him to take them off. He folded his pants, and then his shorts, and set them on the opposite arm of the chair from her clothes. He finished undressing as he said, "That's what I was taught." "Who told you that?" she asked. "My father, I suppose, when I was 16 and we had to talk about sex." 16, said Brigid. "How old are you, anyway?" Wait, don't answer that. I don't want to know. You're not in bad shape, you know. Now, back to the question of who gets on top of whom. Shall I assume that you would like to try the forbidden female superior position? He nodded and lay in the middle of the bed. She raised her eyebrows and went over to the armchair. She came back with the roll of tape. What's that? He asked. Bondage tape, she said, ripping a short piece off the roll. She stuck it to her own arm and pulled it off quickly. It doesn't stick to your skin, so it doesn't pull your arm hair out when you rip it off. It's cool stuff. Give me your hand. Fearless. He did, and she taped his wrist to the headboard. She taped the other wrist to the other side of the headboard. His shoulders felt the strain. There, she said, now you can't get away. I wasn't trying to get away, Edward remarked as she leaned in closer to him. She covered his mouth with hers. His heart beat so fast he became dizzy. He felt nervous, afraid of being caught. His career as a pastor could end in an instant if anyone ever found out. He hated to think what would happen to Barbara Jean if she found out. She already seemed so fragile. At the same time, he felt genuinely aroused. Brigid moved so confidently, he couldn't imagine not being with her. You're going to like this, she said, picking up a condom she'd laid on the bed and unwrapping the package. Amber, the waitress from the parking lot, showed me how to do this, actually, only she used a banana. Then she puckered her lips and showed him her technique for putting on a condom with her mouth. That's a neat trick. I wouldn't have imagined it in my wildest dreams. Shh, Brigid responded. Close your eyes. Relax and let me do the work. She lowered her body onto his, letting him slide inside of her, and moved her hips slowly at first. After building up a slow, steady rhythm, she changed tempos, working furiously. The bed squeaked loudly. The headboard shook, striking the wall with a consistent tap, tap, tap. Edward prayed no one in the next room heard them. Soon Brigid moaned in time to the taps of the headboard. Although the condom made him less sensitive, something else he wasn't expecting, the friction of her grinding hips felt amazing. He moaned along with her, slowly building to a climax. She didn't stop right away. He would have tried to restrain her if his hands were free, but since they weren't, he had to beg her to stop. Brigid peeled the tape off Edward's wrists. It didn't stick to his skin. Brigid took a quick shower. She wrapped a towel around her body and another around her long, loose, wet hair. When she finished, Edward showered too. The water felt hot, but not hot enough to wash away the sin. As Edward scrubbed himself under the water, Brigid went in the other room. She returned with the plastic bag and its paraphernalia. She'd taken off the towels and wore only her underwear. She sat on the toilet lid. Edward watched with morbid curiosity as she tapped some white powder onto the spoon and held a lighter under the spoon, cooking the heroin. She sucked the bubbling substance into one of her needles and carefully tapped out the air. She shot up between her toes. With the heroin in her system, Brigid looked calm, almost blissful for a moment. Then she leaned over the sink and got violently sick. Edward watched her trying to rinse her vomit down the sink. As he got dressed, she lay on the bedroom floor, holding her stomach and moaning softly. Are you going to be okay? He asked her. Yeah, this is actually pretty normal. No, Edward thought as he headed for the door, this is not normal. He had the sick feeling that things would never be normal again. When he reached the Lincoln, the tears started to fall. Edward knew he would have to pull himself together before he could go home to Barbara Jean. He took the long way home. That's the end of episode 3. You're listening to Storytime with Erin O'Riordan. If episode 4 is ready, you can click on the link right here. If you're an author and would like to have your story read on Storytime, make sure you get in touch with me. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss a single episode. Thanks. Have a good day.